which is the well-being of humanity. And what better time to discuss this and what better place? Because New York City has been on the forefront and taken on public health issues, long, strong history, whether it be tobacco control, sugary drinks, nutrition. And this new frontier of the effect of social media on the mental health of children is real. As a grandfather who has 2 grandchildren who will be teenagers in the next 5 years, this is concerning. So I'm really personally grateful all of you have come here to discuss this important topic. And who better to lead us than Dr. Vasan? Not only is he professionally eminently qualified, but also personally, his commitment is clear as President CEO of the Fountain House. So Vasan, over to you, and happy proceedings and welcome again.
Thanks for the kind words, Naveen. Again, thank you for hosting us here today. I also want to welcome today's speakers, as well as our special guests from across the city, the state, and the country. This is truly a national convening, and this is too big a problem to tackle alone. That's why we're joined by representatives from many city, state, and federal agencies, along with major health departments, including Boston, Philadelphia, and LA County. Despite what the industry may want you to believe, let me be clear. There is no doubt that social media is seriously harming our kids. Today, you'll hear from a lot of experts. You'll hear from doctors and lawyers. You'll hear from scholars and philanthropists. You'll hear from leaders of government agencies like me. But the most important experts you'll hear from are those who are affected the most by social media, young people. There's a reason we scheduled this convening today on a school holiday. There are a lot of other things you could be doing today. But by choosing to be here, you are taking control of your own future. So don't be shy. We invited you here because we want to hear your thoughts, your honest perspectives, and your honest experiences. Your voice really matters today and always. Okay, let's do an icebreaker. In the spirit of bringing people together, I'd like everyone here to take 20 seconds to introduce themselves to the people on the left and to the right. I'm sorry, Deputy Mayor, that you are alone in this first row. We did not plan for that. I'm sorry. You can talk to me. Go ahead, 20 seconds. Just introduce yourself. All right, very good, very good. Thank you. What a wonderful thing. What a wonderful buzz and a wonderful sound. A sound that's been missing from our lives for the last 3 years too often. And certainly can't be replicated over Zoom or Teams or any of these software that we use. That sound of people coming together. Now take a moment and consider the time that you spend on social media. And it's far more than 20 seconds for most of us. Does anyone here really wish they spent less time getting to know people like you just did and more time on social media? Can you raise your hand if you believe that? Okay, here's another question for the adults. If a young person in your life asked, would you advise them to spend more time on social media? Anybody? So your answers are telling. There's a reason no one raised their hand. From setting dangerously unrealistic expectations of body image, to catalyzing and accelerating bullying and abuse, to causing significant social isolation and exacerbating depression and anxiety, we know that social media is causing harm. It's not that all social media is bad, but we already know that unregulated and unfettered exposure to social media and all of its content isn't good for us. And we already know that it isn't good for young people. Over the years, as Naveen mentioned, New York City has led the way in reducing harm from various toxins. We've improved the quality of our water and our air, today notwithstanding. We've removed, this is what happens when you edit speeches a few days ago. We've removed pesticides from our parks and our playgrounds. We've taken on big tobacco. and we're dealing with an environmental toxin today. But what about social media? Until now, we haven't treated it like a toxin. Social media might be digital, but it can be just as damaging to our minds as the toxins in tobacco, lead paint, or in the air are for our bodies. And make no mistake, unregulated, unfettered exposure to social media is an environmental toxin. It's one of our most challenging public health threats, especially for young people at critical moments in their social, emotional, and neurological development. The numbers paint a sobering picture. We are most certainly in the midst of a youth mental health crisis. In 2021, 38% of New York City high schoolers reported feeling so sad or so hopeless during the past 12 months that they stopped doing their usual activities. That rate was significantly higher for Black and Latino children. Over the past 10 years, rates of suicidal thoughts amongst high schoolers in New York have increased by more than 34%. And data from our city mirrors national trends and possibly global trends. By multiple measures, youth mental health began to decline sharply around 2010 or in between 2012, between 2010 and 2012. Now, a lot's happened over the last decade, and it's impossible to isolate every factor. But it's so hard to ignore that this drastic change corresponds with widespread access to social media, especially on mobile devices. As a doctor and a public health professional, I can tell you that this is the kind of data we see when people encounter a novel environmental widespread toxin. And we owe our children our sustained and collective focus on what these data are telling us, and that starts today. But my most important job, I'm sorry, Deputy Mayor and Mr. Mayor, who will be here in just a moment, is as a parent of 3 kids. I can tell you how kids are being conditioned to reach for their phones and devices. This toxin is in my home, and it's in homes throughout our nation, and it's almost certainly in yours. Right now, our children have almost uncontrolled exposure to this toxin, and our response as a society has been largely to let it happen. This will be one of the cities, the nation's, the world's toughest public health challenges to date. First, while the overall trends are clear, the research is both developing and complicated. Is social media exposure equally harmful to all children? Or is it uniquely damaging to those with certain pre-existing risk factors, such as mental health conditions or trauma? How does race, gender, ethnicity, sexuality, disability factor in? Second, the ways in which we measure exposure and risk are not cut and dried. For social media, should we consider any use of any platform harmful? Is time spent over a certain threshold more damaging? What about certain content, such as violent or distorted body images? Third, we haven't defined success. While toxins like tobacco and lead paint only pose harms, social media can offer some benefits in the right circumstances. Some young people find a profound source of community, connection, and even joy online. But many others become trapped in a cesspool of bullying, body shaming, and violence that can breed isolation and anger. And in any event, social media is not only pervasive, it's part of the fabric of our lives. We use it at the health department and all across our city government to amplify important information and to reach people quickly. In that way, it is a vital conduit for information that people rely on. In fact, we'll probably post these remarks on social media. There's simply no going backward. It'd be impossible to get rid of social media entirely, and it's not clear that we would want to, even if we could. Lastly, we haven't identified, let alone created, all of the tools we need to do this job. The public health threat from social media may not respond to the usual tactics. We need to think about new policies and rules that can set guardrails for the design of these platforms. Wild West, no more. And we must hold companies accountable for the harm they're causing, whether it be through legal action or conversation on how we can work together to solve this crisis. We must think about tools that parents, teachers, caregivers, and everyone in the community can use to protect our children. These are important questions. Answers will not be easy to come by, not least because social media companies will limit our access to information and lobby to remain unregulated. In fact, the only other industry that I can think of that is so unregulated is the gun industry. Just think about that for a minute. We also have to contend with the reality that social platforms are literally designed to defy any limits on their use. They are designed to foster addiction. Some of the world's most talented engineers are dedicated to keeping you and you and you, and especially you, young people, on social media as much as possible. And it works. It's a daunting task, but we have no higher priority than protecting and promoting the health of the city's young people. It's why we prioritized youth mental health as a part of our citywide mental health plan launched in March and entitled Care, Community, and Action. We care. That's why we're here today. We are a community. That's why we're in this room together. And this is the first step in taking action to protect our kids. We have to start somewhere, and that's why we're all here today. This is a problem that affects everyone, and we need all of the perspectives we can to bring us together. So today, we'll be exploring 4 avenues: research, policy, public health interventions, and litigation. Our panels will help us set the stage and we'll transition then into breakout groups. Our incredible lineup of speakers, both on the panels and in the breakout groups, will equip us with the information we need throughout the day. Guys, this is a working meeting. We got to get to work, right? This isn't a talking meeting. This is a working meeting. Today's event is just the start. Today's conversations will translate into actions, and we don't really have a choice. Continuing on our current course will only worsen the crisis young people find themselves in. We can't leave them at the whims of industry racing to monetize their attention. I believe that if we face this threat head on, we can reduce the damage like we have with other toxins. We can make our cities safer and our kids healthier, and we might not have all the answers, but I'm certain that public health offers the solutions. It's going to take hard work. It's going to take answering tough questions, and there's no doubt this won't be easy. But I sincerely believe that with our collective attention and immediate action, we have the power to change this trajectory for our kids, and we have no time to waste. Thank you. Okay, we're gonna ad lib for just a minute because the mayor is not yet here. I was meant to introduce the mayor. He's 3 minutes out. But I do want to say for just a moment, one of the reasons that I took the role of Commissioner of Health was because in the process of looking into the role, as I was discussing it with the mayor, it became very clear what his commitments were. His commitment is to making this city as healthy and well as possible. And he understands deeply in his own life, his own lived experience, as well as in his policies, that mental health is inextricably tied not only to physical health and well-being, but to the whole health of our city. And as we recover, as we continue our recovery from the worst public health crisis in a century, as we face myriad new challenges, whether it be the needs of thousands, tens of thousands of new New Yorkers arriving to our city, or whether it be unexpected events like today's or the recent days, centering mental health in our city's agenda could never have been or cannot be more important than it is now. And I'm very proud to work for a mayor and an administration that does so. I'll also like to call out Deputy Mayor Ann Williams-Isom, who leads on this work with exactly the right values, the compassion, the care, and the action that we need. And so on behalf of the administration, it's just also a real honor to be here today. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce the 110th mayor of New York City, Eric Adams.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fassan, Deputy Mayor William Ison, First Deputy Mayor Wright, and just the whole team as we deal with this issue. And I think of Norma often. I know she's here somewhere. You know, I think of you often, your amazing son, and losing him to subway surfing. And the moment now is those of us who are lovers of Greek mythology. I believe that this is the Troy War and the Trojan horse. And there was a fortress built around Troy. And the army was able to sneak the Trojan horse inside that fortress. And inside that Trojan horse was the enemy. And they were able to go inside what everyone thought was so well protected. Social media, in my belief, is our new Trojan horse. As a young person, mom, would they be able to lock the door and make sure any harm to any of us? She would not allow us to have a television in our bedroom because we would sit down at the family. She would decide what we will watch together as part of the nurturing. But right now, in our bedrooms, in our restrooms, in our kitchens, in our backyards, everywhere our children go, they have this Trojan horse in their hands. A device that was supposed to be used for communication has turned into a device that is being used in a very destructive way. It is teaching our children at a young, impressionable age to have those synaptic connections that are part of our brain development where we learn patterns. It is creating these synaptic connections that is really causing those neuron connections to have our children be used to some of these habits that are just so harmful and painful. And just a thought that we are coming together as a team is saying, wait, how we realize what is happening right below our eyes, right below our surface. It has snuck up on us, and it has really encaptured our young people almost to a level of addiction that it is unimaginable. And just the intake of information, I don't think our brains were ever supposed to develop this level of constant bombardment over and over and over again. And sometimes I sit in the room with Jordan and his friends, and we'll sit down and we'll have a dinner, and I would intentionally just sit back for a moment. And they're not even communicating with each other. They're just on their devices. And we would spend the whole hour. They would pick up and nibble on their chicken. And I'll say, well, first of all, you should be a vegan, so put that chicken down. And then they would go right back to the devices. But here's the strange part about it. I can't critique Jordan because I find myself doing it. I find myself sitting down with friends and associates, and we pick up the device all the time through our conversations. Something is happening, and I don't know the answer. So to have leaders from Boston and Philadelphia and others come in and just examine the first level, to have the Surgeon General identify this national, if not international, issue we're having. To have some of these young people who are here, which I'm just really excited about. We met at one of our town halls and they shared, and I said, listen, we're getting ready to have this conference. We would need you to come here and talk about it because it is their peer group that is being allured to do subway surfing that's dangerous. It's their peer group that is finding themselves doing these dangerous challenges. We are watching in the city of New York and across the country something called a challenge. It teaches young people how to steal a car, and they challenge each other to steal the vehicle. It's putting a criminal record that is going to harm them throughout their lives. Social media is taking the beauty of entertainment in drill music and taking it and now using it as retaliatory actions against other drill artists. So the natural expression of children to entertain themselves is now being used as a tool to create violence against each other. And these social media companies are well aware of the algorithms that attracts you and lure you into what they're doing. And we cannot show a level of ignorance. Profit cannot be over public safety and health. And that is what we are experiencing. And so Dr. Fassan, the boldness of saying we are going to sit down and not ignore this. This is the same thing we did, Deputy Mayor Williams-Isom, when we said we wanted to look at women's health. The same thing when we said we want to look at the environment. That fire in Canada that is clogging our skies here is something that we've been talking about. This administration is going to lean into the discomfort of these conversations that are challenging. We did not become who we are in this administration so we can just go through the motion. We must identify the Trojan horses, not allow them into the fortress of our families and in our city, in our country. And we must be honest about what we need to do. That's what this conference is about. It is about identifying the problems and effectively moving in a direction to correct them. We're not going to solve it today, but we're going to start the process of going back to our various locales. If it's Boston, Philadelphia, if it's TAG, going back into the communities, starting the process of getting our assignments and then executing the plan and getting into our places of medical professions, our schools, our community groups, our organizations, but all of us coming up with a blueprint so that we can really identify one of the number one threats that I believe is going to hurt the development of the minds of our young people as we move forward and hurt the minds of adults. And so I really thank you for the fast turnaround. We spoke with Dr. Fassan and we said we wanted to do this. For all of you responding from the comments from the Surgeon General and your expertise in this area as we find and identify the solution that we need. Thank you for coming out today. Let's try, and we're going to be as productive as possible and really start identifying this crisis that's among us. Social media should not stop us from being sociable. Human interaction is something that we all need and yearn for. We are a society of communities, and we need to make sure we always hold on to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mayor. You missed all the nice things I said about you, but I'll say some of them again. You had a vision. I was saying why I came to become commissioner is because I knew from the beginning that you wanted to center mental health in this city's recovery. You've been bold, you've been brave. We launched our mental health plan in March, and social media addressing this issue and this convening was in that vision. And I just want to thank you for your leadership on this issue. So we're actually on time, which is quite amazing. I would now like to bring up our first panel, which will explore the future of social media and its implication for young people's mental health. In the interest of time, I'm not going to introduce all of the panelists, but I invite you to read about them and their perspectives and experience in this topic. Their bios can be found in the program that's on the top of your seat. And at this moment, I will welcome Dean Michael Lindsay from the NYU McSilver School of Social Work. Thank you for serving as our moderator, and I hand the floor over to you.
So we're going to jump right into it. We're really thankful that we have a young person who's here to give us a student perspective. Rosiah, I'm going to start with you. Thank you so much for being here. All right. So when your mic is ready, there it is. So Rosiah, help us level set this morning how do you see youth in New York City using social media?
So I do believe that social media has now become one of the main parts of culture within youth. I remember seeing like during my school year, a lot of kids would come in and the first thing they would do is talk about TikTok sounds, or in the dance room when we were changing, out of nowhere, they would start singing TikTok sounds, doing TikTok dances, or they would make TikTok dances, Instagram reels. And I do think that it's just become like a really big part of the youth culture. Yeah, I do believe that it kind of is a good thing. There are some good parts of it because I do see like there are some people who do feel a lot more uplifted by social media, but I do see the negative sides of social media as well. I've also experienced the negative sides of social media. So yeah.
I want to lean into that a little bit more and really sort of get a sense of how do you feel when you're using social media?
So I actually went on like a social media cleanse for like a good 2 years. I was really on TikTok during quarantine. Like I would scroll and my TikTok time during the week would be, I think, over what 120% on screen time. And it'd be like, that's a lot. That's a lot of time to spend on TikTok. And especially during that time, it just made me even more depressed. I was going through my own problems. And being isolated and not really having anyone to talk to, only left social media. And even those things, it didn't really boost my morale. It just made me more addicted. And at the end, I just felt even more depressed anytime I would be on it. There was times where I'd just be laying in my bed and just like not knowing what to do. So I was just like, you know what? Let's delete it, right? And since then, I have not re-downloaded TikTok. I deleted Snapchat like 3 years ago. Haven't downloaded it since. I do only have one social media app, and that is Instagram. And when I first downloaded it, my weekly time on it would be like 7% of my like total phone time per week. But now it's up to 72%. I've only had it for a month, so that's a bit of a problem. But I do see like it can become like one of the main things that can lead you into a spiral of depression. And I do think that it can become very addicting as well. And I've seen that with myself. Before, I would usually reach for my phone to maybe go on my Gmail, see if anybody Gmailed me, see if I have any friends. But now I see myself reaching for Instagram. And I even at one point took off Instagram off my home screen. Like I didn't delete it fully, but I did take it off my home screen. And I still do see myself reaching for Instagram. So I do think that it is a bit of a problem, and I'm starting to see the addictive sides of social media a lot more now.
Rosiah, thank you for level setting, because I think you are offering a real important perspective on what young folks are dealing with in terms of their interaction with social media. Mitch, I'm going to turn to you. I'm a clinician and a researcher. I love data and science. And can you help us to understand what the research says about social media and youth?
Yeah, absolutely. We recently did at the American Psychological Association a review of all the psychological science in this area, because there is quite a lot over the years. And Commissioner Vassan did a great job of outlining some of the caveats and some of the issues. Social media does not affect all kids in the same way. Social media can lead to positive benefits in kids' development, as well as some risk factors. Sorry, I don't know if I'm doing something to make that. Okay, sorry about that. So we know that there are a variety of things that, at least at this point, we can say pretty clearly, these are warning signs. These are concerns that could be affecting development. And perhaps one of the most important is to really set this from what we know about the development of adolescent brains. So after infancy, this is the most important, significant period for brain development and reorganization, basically to set up our neural networks for our adult brains that we're going to have for our lifetimes. These are products that have not been made, it seems, with some of the vulnerabilities that comes from the developing brain in adolescence. The brain develops one region at a time. It doesn't fully develop until the age of 25. We have potentially a vulnerability period when brains are going to be really seeking social connection, feedback. It's why all kids start rolling their eyes at their parents when they're about 10 and 11. It's why they're wanting to talk about peers all the time. We used to be able to detach from that, go home, not pick up the phone and have some limits. We don't have those limits anymore. We have a 24/7 algorithmic drive to keep us engaged as much as possible. That has the potential to change how the brain develops. And until kids are around 25 and they have a completely fully developed self-control center, inhibition center, we're going to see a different experience for kids than we see for adults using the same exact product. So I can tell you more as the panel progresses about all of the many issues we're seeing in the scientific community about problematic use, cyber hate, social comparison, exposure to maladaptive behaviors like cutting or anorexia-like behaviors. I can fill you in with more of that, but the general idea that we have to understand this is interacting with a very important time in brain development, and that makes this a very unique combination of device or platform and brain that we just don't see in adulthood.
I just want to follow up real quick and ask you, because when parents and adults who are not in this space hear things about neurodevelopment, brain development, that sort of thing, break that down for us in a sense that, we can really walk away with an understanding of what that means.
So our brains are basically developing to make us able to handle much more complex information as we become adults, right? And the way we think about the difference in maturity of a young kid versus an adolescent and adult, that's because of brain development and what's changing. So one of the things that we think was happening to get us prepared to be autonomous from our parents is a center of the brain that is filled with dopamine and oxytocin receptors, basically to make us very interested in interacting with peers and very scared of getting any negative feedback from peers. It's an area of the brain that starts developing around 10, 11, 12 for most kids. We all care about what other people think about us. We are all social creatures, right? But we don't pursue every possible social impulse out there because a different part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is the last to develop, it's also an area that we only have in humans or in other very evolved mammals, it stops us from pursuing every possible impulse. But here's the thing, at 10, we've got this drive for social interaction. We can't stop pursuing every impulse for that drive until 25. So from 10 until 25, we've got this unique period where kids are wanting to do whatever their peers want them to do, or at least feeling really sensitized to that kind of peer feedback. The reason why this is important is because, kids' brains are the way that we're developing our brains is based on the context we live in. So there's some emerging research that's starting to show that kids who are picking up their phones very often, we found in our lab that it's actually changing how their brain develops over the next 3 years. They did brain scans with them for 3 years. And we were able to show that the more kids were picking up their phones in 6th grade, the less developed their self-control center was 3 years later.
That's really scary. Young folks. Whoa. Mimi, I'm going to turn to you for a second. Thank you, Mitch. What have you found in terms of the impacts of social media on mental health from your own experience and from those around you?
Yeah, so outside of being a fellow with the Social Science Research Council, I am a mom. I'm a mom of 4 kids, one who is incarcerated at the moment. And I believe that incarceration was also due to algorithmic harm and oppression that exacerbated underlying mental health issues in my son. And so that's a fight that I'm fighting right now. And I can't speak to y'all real without saying that. And so I think that to answer the question, it's really about, first of all, not naming social media addiction, not naming it, calling it out, very clearly explaining the impacts and why it is considered an addiction. That's number one. But at the same time, we have to understand who we're talking to and what we're talking about. We're talking about a generation of people who have been raised on social media and who in reality, you know, this is the way, this is the culture, right? Like, this is how we interact. This is how we speak to one another. This is how we acknowledge what we're doing, you know, and so forth. So when I think about that, and it's actually something that I pondered on last night, and I got really, really sad, to be real. And I got sad because I thought about, at the root of social media and mental health, and especially when as it's impacting our kids and our youth, I thought about, this is nothing new. America has fed and has given us unhealthy doses of addiction or harmful ways in which has manifested itself into mental health illness. And when I say it's nothing new, I think about the root of social media, right? Like we're addressing the social media right now, but at the end of the day, we're talking about the datafication of our lives. We're talking about the commodification of our lives. We're talking about selling our data. Once again, we are for sale. And so it's nothing that's broken. It's working in the ways that it was supposed to work. If you ask the tech developers, they will tell you that they knew. This is not something that is broken. And then we're saying that the youth are to be the ones in order to, fix the problem and put down their phones. Why? Why? It's the same level of addiction. Let me tell you, I was in Vegas the other day, and I'm not gonna lie. I had a good time. I needed that break. And every single time I put that lever out, ching, 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 same thing, ding, ding, right? Same thing. And so when you talk about this addiction and you talk about the level of addiction and mental, how it's impacting our health, we have once again fallen captive to the enslavement of another thing that is meant to harm us. Now, with that said, I just want to mention, I'm excited at the fact that we are on a healing journey, and that is mostly due to our young people. They're the ones that are leading this healing journey. It took us a long time just to even get there, right? And so our young people are the ones that are saying, I needed to detox. I needed to delete this, because they're recognizing a lot sooner than us. And I'm one of the first millennials. Let me just put that out there, okay? They're recognizing very early on what it means to take care of themselves, self-care, #self-care, right? And so I guess, again, I have such a different, unique perspective because of what it has done to my family. And because I intimately understand what it means to be a mom who sees their child completely 100% addicted and seeing these racist, oppressive algorithms literally spiral him out of control.
We're going to talk about tech companies in a second, but Razai, I want to go back to you for a second because Mimi acknowledged being a mother. And what is it from your perspective, a young person's perspective? What do you wish adults knew in terms of how kids are using social media and its impact? One thing you wish they knew.
Honestly, I would say it's hard to say only one thing, but if there was like really a really big thing to say, I wouldn't say, okay, to say this, to explain it, I have to explain something first. I do believe that social media also warrants different changes in the way that teenagers or youth really express their emotions. It really does give you a different perspective on how to express your emotions. When you were younger as a kid, I've met all of you as when you were younger as a kid, you got angry at your parents and you could not say one thing or else, you know, something's gonna happen. But now, because of social media, I do believe that it's not really a lack of regulating emotions, but a lack of knowing how to express yourself properly. Because I've had times where I've gotten really upset at my mom and I'll start yelling at my mom and this and that and the third. And then she won't understand me. She won't understand how I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, because she's just seeing my reaction. And I do think, going back to Mitch's point, I think that's also because of a lack of self-control. And I do wish that adults realized that these emotions aren't only just teenage hormones, you know, because most of the time people will pass off like, oh, you yelling or acting out when you're a teenager as teenage emotions, but it also comes from just seeing things online. Like, if you see someone not regulating your emotions, if you see somebody who's online yelling at their parents, throwing things, kicking things, breaking things, as a child, you're easily influenced by that. No matter how mature we may think we are, no matter how many times we click not interested on stuff, it will always pop up. And at some point, unconsciously, it will affect you. Even if it's small or large, it can be it's an extent. It could be to a very large extent or a very, very small extent. But like, it does really change the way that you interact with the adults around you. So I do wish that adults could be a tad bit more patient when seeing how their children react to certain things, and maybe try to figure out like what is warranting that reaction. Like, is this just teenage hormones? Is this them just being disrespectful? Or is this because of what they're looking at online? Like, oh, what have you been watching? What have you been listening to? What is warranting these reactions? Because sitting down and talking to your child is one of the biggest ways to help them. I'm not trying to go on too long, but I do remember there was a time in which like me and my mom would just yell at each other. Like, we would go back and forth. Me and my mom are one of the same. And we are both definitely a little hard-headed, but you know, it is what it is. But we had a point in which we just sat down and talked to each other. And like, it really helped like the way that we communicated with each other. And it really helped me understand how to communicate my emotions, and also allowed her to realize how to communicate her emotions, you know, because I think at the end of the day, one of the most important things when it comes to children being on social media is also parents regulating what they're doing on social media.
Yes.
Because if you don't know what your child's doing on social media, if you don't know what your child's watching on social media, how are you gonna stop them from doing certain things? Like if your child's watching somebody doing subway surfing, a parent's obvious thought is like, why are you watching that? What are you gaining from that? Some parents will say, go read a book, go outside, do something. But like, just those reactions could change the way that kids interact with each other. So I do think that's one of the big things I would tell adults, like really be invested in your child's like social media, what's the word?
Presence. Right?
Yeah, social media presence.
Yeah. I got to be honest. I like to recruit Resias through social work. Wow. Thank you. So we're going to turn to the tech conversation here. Ravi, you worked at one of the tech companies that's on our mind today. What was the view from within the industry on the impacts of social media and children?
Yeah, so I want to talk about a couple things that I think are unhelpful that are said within industry, maybe not untrue, but unhelpful. One is oftentimes they point out the many benefits that social media has for many kids, and that's true. But I think the fact that it helps a large number of kids, but it also hurts a large number of kids. If you're a parent of a child who is experiencing these negative impacts, it doesn't necessarily matter that it's also helping these other people over there. Like, I think we need to address the large number. We can all agree that it's having a negative impact on a large group of people, and we should address that regardless of the fact that it may also be helping another group of people. So I think just focusing on the part that we agree upon, that there's a large group of people that that need to be helped, and that we can fix these products to help them better, is one thing. Second thing is tech companies often address these things through what they call content moderation, that there's certain kinds of content that don't belong on their platform. I started my time at a tech company working on content moderation. I soon realized that that was never going to be the solution, the long-term solution for these problems. There's a lot of subtle ways that people bully and harass each other or threaten each other that content moderators in a call center somewhere are never going to pick up on. We've all probably said something like, "I'm going to kill you" to each other, which again might violate a policy. We probably didn't actually mean that we were going to kill someone. We probably just were mad at them for stealing our eating our lunch or stealing our cookies. So content moderation is not going to solve these problems. And in everyday life, how do we protect kids? We don't have people who come and enforce upon strangers who talk to them. We don't let any stranger talk to them and then enforce upon the strangers who break the rules. We find the trustworthy people in the world, and we only let our kids interact with those people, right? And so if you kind of flip the script and design a safer system, and you ask yourself, like, why are these things happening online and they're not happening as much in everyday life? And what are the social forces that exist in everyday life, the protective measures that we have for children in everyday life, where we don't let them interact with random strangers, that we need to add online. And then the third thing that people say in tech is about that we're just reflecting what's happening in society as opposed to causing these things. And to some degree, I do think it's unfair to every bad thing that happens on social media or every bad piece of content is not necessarily social media companies' fault. But I do think we can hold them responsible when the design of the system encourages those bad things. And so the analogy I often use is to building codes. We don't hold builders responsible when a building goes up in flames or a bad thing happens in a building. That happens. We do hold them responsible if they design a flammable building, right? If they make a system that encourages bad things to happen. And so, scientists figure out correlation versus causation using experiments. And companies have experimental data on, if they show the like count, if they optimize for engagement, what happens to their system. So we can actually understand, the physics of social media, understand what choices they're making that cause more harmful content to be seen, or cause reports of bullying, or cause certain feelings to occur. And we can hold them accountable for those decisions, not necessarily, the fact that bad things happen on platforms, because that'll always get into issues of are we reflecting society or are we not? But I think if we can get access to some of this experimental data that platforms have, we can start to understand the physics of these situations, maybe design building codes for social media, and start to take a meaningful part in the product decisions that these companies are making.
So I want to lean into that a little bit more and sort of pivot to solutions, right? And can you continue and Robbie and help us to think through how can we design platforms in the future or tweak them in a way that it doesn't cause harm and elevate the potential benefits?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that, from my time there that I think you can learn from the principles of. One, people have talked here about optimizing for engagement. And so I think we know that engagement signals can mislead. We've all spent time with something that we regretted. We've all commented on something that we thought was terrible, and we said like that was terrible. We've all shared something and said like look at this terrible thing. So these engagement signals are often misleading in many instances. If there are ways that we can optimize more precisely for better positive interactions, right? Like give people, instead of a like button, I could go onto a comment thread today. I could say, F you, some political person, and I get a bunch of likes from like people who agree with me about that. A like is not necessarily an indication that I made a very thoughtful comment. What if we had, that was informative. I learned something from that. That was really supportive. Like those kinds of signals that were more precise signals of user value that we could optimize for instead of just time spent. The second thing is adding more friction to the system. So I think there's functionality that exists for some users or in some places. In some countries, it's much easier for people to lock their profiles and to be more private. There are ways that we can add these kinds of friction so that strangers can't interact with our children, with vulnerable people, and people can decide who they want to interact with, and we can make those more the default setting as opposed so that interaction with strangers is no longer the standard, but it's actually the exception that happens when we want it to happen. So friction and rethinking optimizing for engagement, those are just two simple things that we could do to our systems to make them healthier for our kids and for society.
Powerful stuff. Mitch, your organization, can you talk to us about what you all are doing and your partners across the country to mitigate potential harms and also to elevate the benefits?
Absolutely. First of all, the psychological science would support everything that you're saying about what can be done. There are some other things that can be done too that we've talked about in our health advisory. For instance, any product that I buy, especially if I'm buying it for my kids, there's some sort of an insert in there that says, don't play with this electronic toy in the bathtub, here are the safe ways to use this product. It doesn't exist for social media. There's no information to tell you how to use their product safely. And for kids in particular, there could be very easy ways. These are brilliant folks who have put together amazing ways of engaging people in content. What if the content was to teach kids how to use the product safely? Talk to them about the limitations of likes. Talk to them about problematic social media use and the addictive potential qualities. Talk to them about mis and disinformation, how to recognize a bot from a real account. There are a variety of things that we outlined in our advisory to really develop a curriculum for social media literacy that would help people. And we should be doing this as schools. We should be doing this as teachers and parents, but the tech companies themselves could build this right in. When you are given a license to drive a car, you first have to demonstrate competency in knowing how to operate that car safely and how to do it in a public space that won't harm others. We should have the same kind of competency building into the social media platforms themselves. And for kids, we would need booster sessions every few months to say, don't forget, we want to teach you about mis and disinformation. There are several psychological interventions that have been developed by psych scientists to actually demonstrate that you can do this in about 10 minutes online, teach someone some skills, and that affects their ability to have safe and positive social interactions for months to come on social media. That's something that we can do. Also, in collaboration with Corbin Evans at APA as well, and our advocacy team, we've been working directly at the state level and also at the federal level to really help advise legislation and policy considerations. For instance, the COSA Act is one act that we were able to play a role in helping to guide that the recommendations within that act to be based on the psychological science, and APA has endorsed the COSA Act.
That's amazing. How can we get some of this information out into the world, schools or wherever, right? Like, how do we get this information out there? And what's your plan for dissemination?
Well, in our phase 1 of our advisory, we did put up on apa.org a few different guides for parents to say, look, this is not all your responsibility. We need policymakers and tech companies to do their jobs here. But in the meantime, here's some conversation starters you can have with your kids to start to teach them about social media literacy. And that's something that at APA, and I know many other groups that we're excited about partnering with, really together thinking about how we can take our scientific and clinical judgment and turn that into very specific curricula, guides, talking points, instructions for all, for schools, for parents, and so on.
Mimi.
Yeah, I'd like to mention something. So in terms of solutions, I realized that it's people like us that are in the room that may have never thought of being a tech developer or a tech designer. We are the ones that need to actually lean in to the ability to design technology. Right now, that is exactly what I'm doing personally with the Social Science Research Council, is designing a tech platform, a social media platform that is intended to be anti-oppressive, anti-racist, thinking about what it means to create anti-oppressive algorithms, or algorithms that will not continue to perpetuate a system of mental illness and instead provide access to resources, to health, to well-being, XYZ. And so I think that it means for us to encourage and empower our youth right now in the schools, just like how the doctor mentioned, about what it means to have that literacy about mental health, not just social media. But I mean, I come from a year, in school where they would teach you, home economics. I've never seen mental health literacy within the schools. Yes, they may have psychology, right? But having classes particularly for supporting one's mental wellness.
Thank you for that word. Rosalia, how do we engage kids in solutions to some of the challenges we see regarding social media?
Well, I do believe I have been leaning more into the negative side of social media for majority of this conversation. So I will be leaning into the positive side for this part of it. I do believe just like we can make like algorithms, we can lean algorithms, like we can ask like tech makers, I believe, to lean into algorithms that are more positive. Like, oh, let's have this algorithm, let's try and make algorithms more school focused. Oh, if you need help with math, oh, well then look, this is an algorithm teaching you how to do math. If you need help, like if you're like really interested in art and stuff, there's an algorithm just full of art, and maybe some universities for art. All these things that are positive. It also doesn't have to be only school focused. You can be interested in sports. You can be interested in skydiving, and it'll show you an algorithm full of how to skydive safely and like other things that are related to it. So leaning into a more positive algorithm instead of leading into a positive algorithm with some negative aspects, I think would be better in technology and social media.
Right.
Yeah. I just wanted to plus one that, algorithms are zero-sum games. So if I uprank red, I downrank blue. If you uprank positive things, you naturally displace a lot of negative things. And I've often found that that's a much more powerful way. I worked on comment ranking for a while. Your average person reads the top 10 comments of a post, right? It doesn't really matter what's at comment position number 200 if it's a terrible thing. If you can find the really informative best comments or the best posts and you can put them at the top, it can often have a lot more impact than trying to find all the negative things and enforce upon them. So I think it's a really good recommendation.
If I could just add my personal experience onto that, I'm so sorry. With my personal Instagram feed, as of right now, I'm really focused on religion. I'm a Christian. So my Instagram feed is mostly just Christian content, some funny Christian reels, some funny Caribbean reels, because I'm Caribbean. And like a lot of positive things. So just having stuff like that would just lead kids into a more positive environment, and it'll likely cause parents and even people like yourselves to look at social media in a more positive light, because it'll be more positive. I mean, that makes sense. But if it stays the way it is, I do believe that it will just become more hazardous than it is as of right now.
So we're going to close it out here. I want to thank our panel again. Rosaria is a rising 10th grader and stepped up this morning because we had to replace someone. So Rosaria, thank you. Mitch, Mimi, Robbie, thank you. And I just want to close with saying that a few years ago, my colleagues and I did some research looking at healthy lifestyle behaviors and suicide among youth in America. And what we found was that if you were a youth who had a moderately healthy diet, exercised, and got a good night's sleep, you were less likely to engage in suicide behaviors. We also found that if you were at the extreme of too much focus on exercise, healthy eating, or if you didn't focus on that at all in terms of not getting a good night's sleep or exercising, that it was associated with higher risk of suicide. So what I want to leave with is the importance of balance, right? Balance in all that we do, balance in terms of how we obviously interact and engage in social media. And I think that the panel today really gave us a balanced perspective on the risk and benefits for social media. So thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good to be with all of you. Let me first express my heartfelt, sincere, deep appreciation to our mayor, who I guess had to leave, to our first deputy mayor, Sheena Wright, our deputy mayor, Ann Williams-Isom, and our commissioner, Ashwin Basan, for gathering us together. More importantly, for understanding how significant, how important, how critical it is that we as a city center on, good morning, that we as a city center on our young persons and their mental well-being, and focus specifically on the impact of social media on you all, your lives today and in the future. This is a critical conversation, and frankly, one that kind of like is talked at, but not really talked about and really dealt with. And so I'm really grateful, very appreciative that we're having this conversation. As Deputy Williams-Isom will remember, when she and I both served in the, I guess we were in the Bloomberg administration, and we were under then Commissioner William Bell of the Administration for Children's Services. He would often begin every meeting with, Kasera Injera, how are the children? And how are the children? And what it was a, an African tribal greeting that was exchanged, centering on the children, understanding that if the children aren't well, we aren't well. Mm-hmm. We as a society, we as a people are not well. And so what we're doing today is centering on the children, on the youth, and I'm grateful for that. And I'm glad to be in conversation with this esteemed panel, beginning with Amy Guzman, who is like, she's a bad mamma jamma because she stepped up to the plate and said, I'm gonna talk about my experience. Didn't come here necessarily to do that, but we're glad that you did. And also joined by 3 other panelists who we'll introduce in just a moment. So I am a mother of a 25-year-old and a 21-year-old. And social media really kind of like started like heating up when my daughter, my 25-year-old, was in high school. I remember well the fights with her about, like, are you on social media, or are you in the computer centering on your homework, centering on your studies? And just realizing like it wasn't no longer just music. It wasn't like the TV that might be a distraction. But now we had something that frankly, I couldn't necessarily really control. I didn't know, like, when she was on her phone, was she texting with people about schoolwork? Or was she in, on Facebook? Because Facebook was big then, right? For the young people, not today. Son the same, 21. I've kind of been out of that game for a little while in terms of like the young teenagers. So, and social media has like really intensified with Instagram, TikTok, and the like. So I need you first to help us, just as Razia did, center us, ground us, share with us, Amy, your experience, your perspective.
First thing I would like to do is thank all the parents that are here. Thank you so much for showing up and showing that you care about our youth, the next generation, for our future commissioners, our future mayors, our future deputy mayors. My experience with social media, as I've said before, social media is something that we're raised with. It's not something that, all right, so I would like to say something that my mom, hello? You guys can hear me? Okay. I would like to say something that my mom always tells me, and she's like, you won't last a day in my generation. And it's like, I look at her and I say, you're wrong. You're wrong. I would last a day. I would last a decade. I'll last an eternity in your generation because that's how you were raised. That's how I would have been raised. Now, if you say I would not last a day in your generation with the mentality I have now, you're right. Because we're all raised differently. The generation is raised differently. With the technology, with the social media, we're all raised differently. You can't say we're gonna completely take away social media. You need to learn how to substitute. You need to learn to hear the youth's voice. My experience with social media, I am a victim of bullying, cyberbullying, and you might not see it on my face because I've healed from that, as I hope all the youth who are victims of that have been doing. It scares me because I'm an older sister of 3. It scares me to see that my 13-year-old sister is on TikTok, that my 7-year-old sister is on TikTok. It's like, I'm on TikTok myself and I see all these things. And I'm like, are you seeing the same things I'm seeing? Are you really a victim of things that I was a victim of? So I completely support the change in the algorithms, the parental support, and just seeing what your kids are doing on social media. Please be present. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to be spending more time with you. We want you to stay in this conversation. We need your wisdom. We need your input, your guidance. We're going to talk to 3 people who are also leaning into this space from the regulatory vantage point. They are Gabriella Shea, JD Senior Policy Analyst at Bipartisan Policy Center, Nicholas B. Allen, PhD, Ann Swindell's Professor and Director of the Center for Digital Mental Health at the University of Oregon, and Corbin, who stepped up to the plate as well. And I don't have a one-liner for you, so you've got to give it to us.
Sure, JD as well. I am a Senior Director of Congressional and Federal Relations at the American Psychological Association, so work with Dr. Mitch Pritzstein.
Wonderful, wonderful. Good to have the 3 of you with us. I myself am an attorney, and one of the things that I've come to appreciate is that here in America, not much is done by way of change for society for the better if we don't legislate it, if we don't regulate it. We know very well that, for years we were telling people to wear seatbelts until it became the law that you had to wear a seatbelt. Many people did not. And so we find ourselves now having talked at length about the challenges with respect to social media on the mental health of many people and young persons in particular, but still not enough is being done about it. Just this morning, I was listening to the news, hearing about how there are now algorithms, or there have been algorithms that Instagram is very much aware of that allow for the perpetuation of pedophilia. And they know it's there and they're not doing anything about it. YouTube just decided they're not going to regulate anymore any of the narrative around, stolen elections. So what is the landscape right now? What is the appetite? And I'm just going to begin with you, Gabby, Corbin, you lean in, and Nick, if you have something to share. What's the political landscape? What's the appetite right now for doing something around social media and its impact on young persons?
Well, I'll begin by saying thank you for that question. Thank you to everybody here today for inviting me to join. I am a New Yorker at heart. I was born in Westchester County, grew up on Long Island, and although I do live in the DC area now, I am thrilled to be back, even under the smoky circumstances we're in today. In terms of the landscape, I will be speaking about it primarily today from that DC perspective, because the organization I work for does focus primarily on federal legislation, but I can talk a bit about what's going on at the state and local level too. In terms of the landscape, I like to level set initially by saying we're not operating in a total legal vacuum. The Federal Trade Commission, the Department of Justice, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau did just issue a very important statement that says that existing legal authorities do apply similarly to situations in which you're using automated systems or other innovative technologies. And that's important to remember. That said, there is significant ambiguity as to how many of those existing legal authorities apply when you're in situations with emerging technologies. And everyone I've spoken to in DC seems motivated, at least overall, to do something to address those ambiguities and to close gaps in the current legal framework. There's also quite a bit of research being undertaken today, which we've heard a bit about already, and I'm sure my fellow panelists can discuss as well, that will hopefully continue to inform ongoing legislative efforts and can motivate future legislative efforts. What we've seen so far, I'll lay it out at a high level on the federal level, is there are a number of different avenues to address social media through legislation. We're seeing broad consumer data privacy legislation, versions of data privacy legislation that are very narrowly focused on children's data privacy and online safety, some of which have already been mentioned. And we're seeing AI governance bills with the ability to impact these issues and content moderation bills. We're seeing similar trends at the state level, consumer data privacy legislation, increasingly TikTok ban legislation, content moderation legislation, and even AI bills. Sometimes they're called automated decision systems bills, so that's worth keeping an eye out for. And New York City has taken action on some of these emerging technologies as well. So, we can elaborate on that, and I'll obviously let my panelists speak to it, my fellow panelists speak to it more. But what I would say is I do think overall there is an appetite for federal legislation, and that will be an important path to pursue, given that the harms and the benefits that we see from social media have nationwide impacts. And for that reason, I think we probably need a nationwide approach to policy. And I think members of Congress from both political parties are recognizing that, even if they don't know exactly how to move forward just yet.
Let me quickly ask before we turn to Carl Corbin, is the legislation centering on young persons, or is it in general?
So that is there are a number of different approaches. Some of them are directly focused on young people. Examples include COPPA 2.0, which is the Children and Teens Online Privacy Protection Act, and COSA, which has already been referenced, and I think is in at least a version of the packet that I've seen, the Kids Online Safety Act. Both of those have bipartisan support, and they are focused on youth. But then there are broader bills, like the broader Consumer Data Privacy Bill we saw last Congress, the American Data Privacy and Protection Act, or ADPPA. DC has a lot of acronyms. Call me out if I start launching into acronyms here. But that bill had a number of provisions that would apply generally, and then had provisions that target children specifically, notably provisions related to targeted advertising. So you see a mix of both.
Yeah, we'd love to pick up there and talk a little bit about the areas with which we're seeing attention. One, this being a great example. We really deeply appreciate the attention and focus that this issue is receiving, that the harms are being discussed in forums like this at the local, state, and federal level. And just like my panelist was saying, we're seeing attention kind of coming out of the woodworks, whether it be new bills in California or in Utah or in Montana or Arkansas. The state level is incredibly active at trying to solve some of the problems that we're discussing here today. But I think the piece you said that I would kind of seize on is the importance of federal legislation and regulation in this area. Having a 50-state solution, or even more so when you take it to the local level, is really going to prove problematic in terms of its ability to implement and our ability to actually keep these companies, these platforms and technologies adequately regulated to ensure that these harms are mitigated. And so looking at the federal solutions, we have seen a huge amount of attention. I would say that this is probably one of the premier bipartisan issues that we've seen attention placed over the past, what would you say, 18 months to 2 years. This has really kind of rocketed to the forefront. We have seen a dozen or so hearings across both the House and the Senate, probably twice as many bills introduced over that time. But the issue is we haven't seen passage of those pieces. And we haven't actually seen, the regulatory advisory opinions issued last week are important and start to indicate that some of these agencies are looking to get into the game. Congress has indicated that they're looking to get into the game, but everyone is still on the sidelines. And so the harms that we've talked about and will continue to talk about are perpetuating. So really want to talk about ways that we can push collectively, folks in this room and outside of this room, push collectively for some of that action to actually take effect.
So this is good news. I mean, it's good news to hear that Congress is leaning in and paying attention to this issue. I'm going to be honest and tell you, I can't help but think to myself, what is driving their thinking? What is the legislative intent? What is informing their thoughts about what the legislation should look like, the regulations, et cetera? And so, Nick, I know that you've been working on recommendations. You've been working with young persons. You're deeply embedded in the science behind all this. What are your thoughts about what should be informing Congress and other legislators as they address this topic?
Well, I think the first thing that I would emphasize is we've got to recognize that there's a number of reasons there hasn't been passage of legislation, but one of them is that this is a uniquely difficult legislative and regulatory problem, right? It's not easy to regulate this stuff, especially around age restrictions. So the models that we have for things like tobacco and alcohol really don't apply easily to this particular problem because, we can't regulate at point of sale in the same way that we can because age verification is really hard to do. It's not impossible, but it's actually a very difficult technical and regulatory legislative problem. So the first thing is that this is tough. This is new. We need very smart regulation and legislation, and some of the old models are not going to work well for us. I think the second thing that I'd point out is that young people in this area have both participatory rights and protective rights. So they have the right to participate in things that are important to them, and they also have the right to be protected from harms. And getting that balanced up right is also a tricky thing, especially when, comparing it to smoking, for example, is not a good comparison because smoking is tobacco is a product that's harmful at any level of usage, right? And yet, when we're talking about technology broadly, and even social media in particular, we're talking about things that people are going to be using throughout their life, in their work life, in their social life, in their access to entertainment, in their access to communication. Like it's going to be part of their adult life. And we really don't, and when we're thinking about young people and how to support them in their journey to adulthood, we really want to find a way to introduce them to the things that are going to be important and critical. So, any of us who use Slack at work, or something like that, the fact that there's more working from home and things like that, these tools are going to be essential to young people's lives. So we can't simply say, well, you can't touch it till you're 18. right? That
Right.
wouldn't prepare them for adulthood. So we're trying to get these things balanced up. So I think that we have to look at three important factors. We definitely need to look at regulation and legislation, but we also need to look at design, which was emphasized on the previous panel, and how these products are designed, and how do we get the business models that are being used by the technology companies aligned with the well-being interests of their users. So I've got more to say on that. And then finally, education is critical, and that was touched on the previous panel as well. And we have lots of opportunities for education that we're not taking up. And some of them should probably happen in the family, but a lot of them should happen in schools, and a lot of them should be happening in public messaging and other things like that. And we're really not doing that work at the moment. So I think regulation is part of the problem, but because of the nature of the issue, there's not going to be a simple solution there, and we need to look at these other domains as well.
Very good point. Amy?
To add on to what Nick said, I completely agree with the educational wise, but I would also like to put out there that I feel like on social media, it's promoted more the negative things than the positive things. And what I mean by that is there's people who don't even know you can put an Instagram account on private. There's people who don't even know that you can block out certain comments from being commented on your social media. Like there's things like that that aren't, like the previous panel said, there's things that have to be advocated for everyone else to know. Even though it's advocated to me, it might be advocated to you, it might be advocated to everybody in this room, but what about everybody outside this room? This is how much % of everyone else's population. So it needs to be advocated. I completely agree with Nick. In schools, it has to be advocated before you even enter social media. Yeah.
And I just have to throw in my 2 cents. It's, it has to be advocated also, or needs to be thought of in the context of community and schools and supports, all of those other very important aspects of young person's lives that, when you have downtime causes you to run to Instagram, TikTok, and wherever. If we had more supports for young people in their communities, am I off on that? Am I old on that? I don't know.
No, I want to add on to that. Actually, I was speaking to that with my leader that's over there. I'm in a group called TAG, that stands for Teaching a Generation and Teens Against Guns, and we're a nonprofit organization for the youth. And we just try to take the youth off the street, give the youth a hobby more than a burden. And I was going to add on to that I feel like that goes back to what I was saying first. It should be substituted by things. Social media shouldn't be taken away. It should be substituted by certain things, by hobbies outside of social media, because you're not going to find yourself on social media if you're doing something productive.
That's right.
Sure.
Unless you're like me and you wake up in the middle of the night, you can't go back to sleep. So we say it's hard to regulate. I'm sure that in generations past, they said it was hard to regulate television. It was hard to regulate drinking. Like, can we look to other examples where we found a way to, I'm saying this in America right now, can we look to other examples where we figured it out, where it was tough, but there are other examples of products that have been regulated in a way that has helped to keep the product out in the world, but has prevented harm or further harm.
I like the car analogy. We've kind of touched around it in a few different ways, in which social media is a tool that requires some pre-training, some education, the advocating around, educating young people before they get behind the wheel, before they pick up their phone and get on social media. And just in the same way that a car can be used for really productive, really positive impacts on yourself and the community, we see that present in social media as well. The other side, of course, is that without training, without education, it can be really dangerous to get behind the wheel. It can be really dangerous to pick up a cell phone and get on social media without that pre-education. And I think, to draw the analogy out, I think we hopefully are careening towards that unsafe at any speed moment, in which we look to the dangers associated with driving a car, with being on social media, and we find a way forward with the combination of the thing I think Nick was pointing to. The only piece I would add there is the research associated as well. I think we're playing off each other so well that the mics are picking it up.
Yeah, can I pick up on that? Yeah, so I must say, I think the car analogy is very useful. I think, like all analogies, it has limitations, right? So I've used it many times myself. And I think the important thing is it's a technology that we all understand has benefits and risks. And this is true of every technology, well, almost every technology. And so, you know, because let's face it, a large number of people are going to die today using a car, right? And yet it's a technology that we've integrated into our lifestyles and in society. And we have education, we have regulation, and we have design requirements on the companies. And so in doing that, we're able to bring the road toll down, and we're having good success with that as a public health outcome. Too many people obviously still die that way, but it is something that we're making progress on. The point at which the analogy stops to work is that you can regulate the use of motor vehicles in a way that you can't regulate the use of social media and other technologies. For example, there was some research done where they compared an objective measure of how young people were using their phones to a questionnaire measure that they gave to young people and to their parents. Now, what the young people told you about how they were using their phones on a questionnaire correlated somewhat with the objective measure, but not too strongly. What the parents said about how their kids were using social media did not correlate at all. So the point is, parents don't know. And if you think you do, the only way you will know is if your kid is willing to talk to you about it. Right? That is the only way you will know. So that is a unique problem that doesn't apply to the automobile, because in the automobile, you generally have some hope of knowing whether your kid's driving a car or not. But in this case,
the
you
gas
don't know.
tank empty and they didn't fill it up.
Right, exactly. So anyway, so I think that's where we've got to admit that there is something that's very similar about this analogy, but there's also something that's uniquely challenging here too, which is the fact that ultimately the young person is going to have to be the decider.
Look, Amy, did you want?
Oh, sorry.
No, come on. We need to hear from you.
What you call it? I completely agree with Nick that it is the young person who comes to decide, which is why I go again to the advocation. If you advocate the right decision, it's a common sense. It's not even a decision anymore. It's just what you have to do. So.
Great.
You know, I think what's so challenging about all this what's so challenging about this topic and this issue in particular is that sometimes you don't really know that you're being harmed until you've been harmed, right? And so we can talk about like children taking ownership, young persons taking ownership, but with all of the different influences in their lives, social media can often be an escape from other. And so we have to factor all of that in. Let's talk a little bit about, you all touched upon design impact, or how to control like in the design space. Any thoughts about social media companies? What, when we think about design elements of these programs, these apps, what they should be thinking about, or what you'd like to see by way of regulation for them, like with respect to how they design them, how they promote them, things of that nature.
Happy to
No,
start.
go for it.
Well, I think that Robbie was touching on a few things from his experience within the social media companies themselves, that they have so much information about how young people and people in general are using the platforms. Giving that information to researchers, to policymakers, to parents would help really illuminate some of the real negative harms that we may not even know about yet. Things like the way that they're upbreaking comments or prioritizing posts that may be particularly controversial, that are having that problematic back and forth in the comments that may ultimately really be harmful content to begin with, serving it up to individuals that are seeing that in their feeds. So those pieces, I think, are really important for them to keep in mind, and that transparency and the research piece is really going to be important in taking that forward. But just asking these companies to do what's best for children and young users, I think, is the catch-all that we've started to think really seriously about. That there's an opportunity here to create a duty within these companies to do what's best for our children, because we don't know what they know. And we don't have the same ability, you know, from Nick's point, to regulate what we don't completely understand.
I can give a quick example of that just in my own personal experience. So last week, I got an alert, a notice, or whatever on Instagram. There was a story trending, and you guys are going to help me because I can't remember this individual's name. A young woman, 32 years of age, 3 children, died after having undergone a mommy makeover. So sad. I mean, just tragic. Three young children she left behind. I bring it up because I'd never heard of this individual. And all of a sudden, like, her story's on my page. And I'll tell you, I'm reading it and I'm thinking, how sad is this? And then I'm like, what? A mommy makeover? What's a mommy makeover? And then all of a sudden I find myself thinking, wow, maybe I should have gotten a mommy makeover. But what I'm trying to help you lean in and appreciate is that, like, I'd never thought about surgery after having children. My body is my body, right? I'm gifted to be alive. But now I'm reading this mommy makeover thing that people are doing. Maybe I should be leaning in. Maybe I should. I'm not saying that I should. But my point is, even at 54 years of age, well, you guys are good to me. But you hear what I'm saying? Like, even at my age, I'm like, oh, what is this? Maybe I should lean in.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I'd never even heard of her. But now somehow it's on my page.
And we understand that, so the companies send that out as a push notification, and they'll send it to you, but they won't send it to her. And they'll say, oh, well, you clicked on it, so let's send more of that. Let's further, you know, and they have that data, they're tracking, they understand what of those push notifications are successful and what aren't, how long you stayed on the program. If you clicked on the mommy makeover hashtag as a result, they're tracking that, they're understanding what is the most addictive and ultimately can be the most problematic and harmful.
They can control for that. They can
exactly right.
And I think that does illustrate the multifaceted approach that legislation would need to take to address these harms or risks of harms. In your case, hopefully, you know, it won't materialize. But I think, right, so and Congress is looking at it in a multifaceted capacity too. But 3 of the primary tracks we're seeing are, first and foremost, data privacy legislation. So if they're not collecting data on what you're clicking, or if there are limitations on how they can analyze and use that, if there are you know, different governance frameworks around how content can get recommended to particular individuals or certain demographic groups of individuals. That's one way to address this. Again, we're seeing that broadly. We're also seeing it focused specifically on children. Both of those tracks within privacy have bipartisan support. On the AI governance piece, that's kind of another level of this, another area where there's a lot of bipartisan support. We have seen administration action out of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy to develop, and they've already released an AI Bill of Rights. There's ongoing requests for information on automated worker surveillance technologies and priorities for AI that could inform a national strategy that's building on previous work as well. And I should say, on the privacy front too, federal agencies are engaged there, in particular the Federal Trade Commission and NTIA as well. But on AI, NTIA, sorry, the National Telecommunications and
Information Administration.
Yeah, that's what but you know, there's a lot of agency activity on privacy, also on AI, and we're seeing a big push right now for bipartisan AI governance legislation, which Senator Schumer is spearheading, but he's joined in a bipartisan coalition there. And then and those types of governance frameworks, we don't know what the one I just mentioned will look like yet. It hasn't been released, but AI governance legislation can impact the AI-powered content moderation
Mhm.
systems. So much of content moderation now is automated, given the tremendous volume of interaction and activity occurring online. But those types of laws could also impact the availability of things like face filters and other image enhancement technologies, which can play a big role in some of the challenges we're seeing online. And then I'd also flag content moderation legislation. Corbin's already referenced a few of the areas that have bipartisan support, like increasing transparency obligations and researcher access to data, but also, addressing particular types of content are areas where we're seeing lawmakers from both parties come together, in particular, misdis and malinformation, terrorism, foreign influence operations. Hate speech is an area that kind of cuts both ways. We've seen drugs similarly, but especially for, organized drug trafficking, there can be a tremendous amount of bipartisan support there. So, there are different paths to moving forward, and different types of legislation would impact this ecosystem differently.
Corbin, please.
I just wanted to add one thing, which is that I think that one aspect of this issue that is really critical is the underlying business model by which the technology companies make profits. And so I've interacted with people at most of the large tech companies, and I can assure you that in every single one of them, there are thoughtful, well-meaning people who are in the safety and well-being area of that company, who are trying to make the products safe, trying to make the products promote well-being. They often don't have a lot of power ultimately, because they hit up against the business priorities that are largely driven by the behavioral advertising business model. And this is in my opinion, sort of the original sin of the internet, that we evolved to this thing where people expected to get stuff for free. And then as a result of getting stuff for free, they had to monetize it somehow, because it's not free to deliver the service. And so then they say, okay, well, what we'll do is we'll target you with advertising. And how do we do that in a way that's better than the newspapers and the television? Well, we understand your pattern of behavior. And so now we're collecting data, right? And when we're using this, this is problematic in general. But when you're using this with young people, it's especially problematic, because what it does is it motivates the design of products that are engaging or addictive, depending on how you want to talk about it, rather than products that are good products that you like, whereas if you have a different business model, like a subscription model, someone has to like the product or they won't re-up paying for it. Now, subscription models have their own problems. They can create more of a digital divide and so forth. So once again, there's probably not simple answers here, but I do think we need to be aware that the business model is a key component here. And what we really need to be focusing on in legislation, I think, and regulation is how do we get the business incentives aligned with the well-being and health incentives. And the closer we can get, because at the moment they're very misaligned. So I don't think we can forget about this business aspect.
I'm well out of my depth, way out of my depth, but appreciating that you can be online, not on one of the social media platforms, but you can simply be online looking at a dress. And, like you look at the dress or you look at the website 2 or 3 times, and the next thing you know, on your social media, pages, it's popping up. So the relationship even between the social media companies and other organizations, companies.
Or you're on the New York Times and suddenly you've got an ad for the thing you just, sorry to mention one website, but any website,
So it's I guess I'm speaking to, it's like not just the business of the social media companies, but the relationship with, what is the game that's going on between the social media companies and other companies with respect to the exchange of data and information, the algorithms, the like, and how that then just feeds this challenge.
I agree with both of you, and I would like to add on that I feel like it's more so, okay, so one example would be, I would be on Netflix watching a new series. The next thing I go on TikTok and I'm now watching skips and reels of I'm like, how in the world? But like you said, it's the relationship that they have between the both, but it's more the relationship towards the profit of a capitalist society that we live in. And so I feel like the capitalist society we live in should not be going to our mental health. Our mental health has nothing to do with profits. Our mental health has nothing to do with how much you make, how much you have in your bank account. It has to do with who we are as a human being.
All right, so Rosie is going to work at DOHMH. You're coming to work with me at FPWA, where we fight poverty, beginning with understanding that capitalism is like essentially the bedrock of a lot of our challenges in America, or the anyway, off topic, let's get back to topic. Corbin, you said that we need to really tackle this from the federal level, federal legislation. And I agree with you wholeheartedly, appreciating just going back to my constitutional law days, right? Because social media companies are not operating one state, state by state by state, interstate commerce, state, all of that, right? Federal trades, communications. That said, states can do some things. And so if we could just take for a few minutes, let's just take a few minutes and talk about what states can and should be doing. Even local legislators, local administrators.
I would say that there are certainly a couple of prongs of Nick's pieces there that he's laid out that you all here in New York City, and certainly New York State can take on. The education piece, I think, is incredibly important. You all have such a huge platform within the New York City public school system to be able to talk to folks like this and say, we know that there are positive and negatives of social media. Here's the ways where you can maximize the benefits and minimize the negative impacts. I think that would be incredibly important. The research piece I would also touch on. You have a huge amount of individuals that could be telling you all how social media is impacting their lives. And a wealth of researchers here in the city that I think would be happy to work with you all to learn more about some of those impacts and hopefully ultimately inform some of the regulatory action that we've talked about as well. So I think those pieces would be great.
I would add to that as well. You know, when you're operating at a local level, you are the experts on your local communities. I think the mayor said it right. We're a society of communities. And so in order to develop whole of society approaches, we need to know what's going on in those individual communities. And so regardless of what your scope is policy-wise, you can be the expert on what it is you're focused on, right? So ideally, federal legislation would be informed by community level data and state level data, and we would integrate that into a federal approach that can work nationwide. But that certainly shouldn't discount the importance of really diving in deep at the community and the state level.
Absolutely. One of the challenges that is presented or that we grapple with in any on any advocacy issues, that there are multiple issues within the issue. So when we talk about the harms of social media on young persons, here in New York, we've centered a lot on the connection of social media to violence. Some people talk about social media and eating disorders, body image, social media and its impact on your sense of worth, tied to, you know, how much you have compared to, you know, somebody else having more. And so what often happens in many advocacy spaces is that you've got people who think their issue within their sub issue within the larger issue is primary. And they start kind of competing one against the other. No, we need to center first on eating disorders and body image, or no, we need to be talking about violence. And sometimes it's got to be an and all approach. What is the advice that we should be giving in this space to people who are advocating, centering on building coalition around this? Any thoughts?
I'm happy to jump in initially, but I'm sure everyone would have great points to add. I think, you know, it's important to start with the purpose of building the broadest possible coalition, given the political environment we're in. New York is interesting because it is single party control of the governor's office and both chambers of the state legislature. Nationwide, I think there are 17 states that are Democrat controlled. in those 3 capacities, and 22 that are Republican controlled and 11 that are divided. And our federal government is divided as well, right? We have Democrat in the White House and Democrat control of the Senate, but Republican control of the House. That just creates a need to work across the aisle, which is a huge part of BPC's mission. But it's not just political coalition building, it's also demographic and disciplinary diversity. So, we can see we've done a great job today by assembling so many different perspectives and experts and in different fields with different life experiences. And all of that is going to need to inform effective federal policy that focuses on mitigating the risks of harms, which we've discussed quite a bit, and protecting the benefits, because we have seen social media be used by activists to organize and to facilitate social connectedness, especially in areas where youth may feel like they're the only member of their town that looks or feels the way that they do, or that has a particular identity. And that ability to connect with others online is something that I don't think anyone wants to lose. Right. So, think about both the benefits and the risks and bring as many people together as possible.
No, I think that's exactly right. The prohibition isn't gonna solve the problem, right? But I would just quickly add that this conversation has included the word bipartisan more than almost anyone that I have taken
More
place
than we've
in
heard
a long
in the last
time.
8 years.
Right? Republicans and Democrats understand that there is an issue here and they want to come together. And for that reason, I'm pretty optimistic that, for your generation and moving forward, that we'll see these solutions start to come into place.
That's good news.
I think just overall normalizing hearing out the young people before making drastic decisions, and also normalizing things as in it's okay to be in an organization that's against guns. Me living in the Bronx, when I first joined my organization, people would look at me with a shirt that says Teens Against Guns. They would look at me sideways. And I'll just be like, why? Because it's not normalized for a teen to advocate for not guns, because it's not normalized for a teen to advocate that they want to teach a generation, that they want to be that they want to be a better version of themselves. So I think it's just overall advocating and advertising the better of the youth.
Really, really appreciate it. You all have shared so much, and as we have to wrap up now, I want to thank you all for informing me, better educating me, and those who are gathered. So much spoken here that we need to lean into. This needs to be the first of many conversations coupled with action. And then I'm just going to end us on bringing forth some of Amy's words that really center on the root of this harm is not the social media companies in and of themselves. It's the society that we've created that has us all looking at one another and being desirous of something more or something different, and not seeing ourselves as individuals as worthy for how we show up, when we show up, and how we show up. And so we need to center on that as the kind of underlying root harm that brings about these greater harms. So thank you, Amy. Thank you so much. Thank you, Corbin and Gabby, and thank you, Nick. Thank you all.
We are going to hear from each of our moderators, some of the key themes and also action steps. We recognize we only have a short time to kind of do this session, but what I wanted to also point out is we have really documented all of the conversations and issues and action items and things that have come out of this. So while we're going to focus on a few key themes today, we're really, at this moment, we really are going to take all of this feedback and information back and put it together, as I mentioned earlier, in a report that's really going to help us design our approach. So what I'd like to do is start with our, and again, just as a reminder, the groups were research, policy and advocacy, litigation, and public health strategies. So why don't we start with our research group? And if you can just share what the sort of, again, key themes were in the discussion.
So it was a rich discussion. I want to thank my group again for their participation. We had a lot of discussion about better understanding the algorithms, what is bringing youth to particular sites, how their behavior is interacting on social media. How can we look forward to what's coming ahead and not be dated into 10 years ago, right? How are we looking ahead? Long-term implications, creating better pathways between research and the industry.
Great, thank you very much. And when we think about long-term implications and what do we need to be thinking about when we look ahead, it will bring us to our sort of policy and advocacy group. And can we hear a little bit about that group and what the key themes were there?
Yeah, there was many really good ones. I think we ended up speaking about, how do we regulate the content or not, right? Is it about regulating the content, or is it about giving appropriate content warnings and also customizing the design so that the design and the underlying algorithms, perform differently for young people, right, versus adults, which is not something that currently happens or happens enough. We talked a lot about giving the user better, more nuanced control, right, over what they're selecting to see rather than having content sort of pushed to them that they didn't ask for. And also some more parental controls as well, right, if it is a young person who is using the site. And we also talked a lot about two other things, which I'd say one was accountability, right? That it's very hard right now to hold the social media companies accountable and need stronger ways to do that. And finally, also more sort of information and transparency around that information. So making both for us to collect better information, right, about how these sites affect young people, but also knowing that the companies themselves are required to collect data and also assess potential for harm. And that's not always made transparent to the public, that would also be another area for exploration.
Great, thanks very much. And Marnie, just on that, in terms of all of those items, when you thought about both the policy and advocacy piece, did you guys talk at all about sort of who to advocate to for this?
Yeah, our speakers were fantastic, Nicole and Corbin. And I think that, it was, we talked about it a little bit at various levels. So, what sort of is going to be more effective down at the state level versus what really has to happen, at a more national level, but we didn't get into the technicalities.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. But I'm hoping some group did get into the technicalities. So when we talk about sort of state and federal policies, it goes beyond policy at the state and federal level, right? It also goes into law and what litigation potentially might look like. And I'm just wondering if you can share some key themes from the litigation group.
Totally. I think one of the things that quickly became evident is that there are a lot of very smart people already asking these questions. And our experts, Dean Kawamoto and Kitty K. Chan, really laid out a great foundation for the rest of us. They really asked us to think about two things. One, how do you prove harm? And then how do you calculate the cost of that harm? And so the group very quickly oriented around two things that were actionable and can be done in the short term. One is really thinking about filing amicus briefs. That's across, city, state, across multiple partners. And then the other one is really exploring, well, what kind of data can substantiate all of these conversations? And that range from both qualitative and quantitative data, which we had a very rich discussion around, with the types of social media, who are we measuring? How do we engage the youth and their families? So that, I think, was a really fruitful part of the discussion.
Great, thanks very much. And then rounding out the groups, we also had a very important group discussing public health strategies. So can we share some of the themes from that group?
Sure. Some of the themes from the public health group were really, for me, taking in is education. Right? Educating our communities, making sure that we are gathering information from all stakeholders on a community level, within the schools, within conversations, to make sure that individuals are aware of the risk, but also the benefits, and making sure that people are aware of what they can do. So really, I took from it literacy, like I mentioned, empowering our families, our parents, and having conversations and feeling comfortable, not necessarily putting the onus only on our parents, but that it's a societal issue that we have to address as a whole, right? Like we sat in collaboration and community, so utilizing the community in expressing and lending that voice to the larger scale. lifting the voice of our youth, right? Utilizing them in conversations like the groups that you had here. Some of our young people and members of our group mentioned, train the trainers, right? Training our youth and being able to speak to the issues that are relevant to themselves and their community, but then also teaching other youth across the board. And we also spoke of not leading with fear, right? So we know that there are harmful effects, but sometimes when we lead with fear, that's a deterrent for individuals. So how do we lead with the fact that we know there are dangers, we know that in some spaces and places it can be harmful, but how do we turn that around? Right? And how do we make sure that people are empowered with education in order to make better and informed choices, which also help our parents and our caretakers be able to communicate efficiently with their young people?
Great, thank you very much. And as I mentioned earlier today, and as the commissioner has stated throughout his remarks and throughout kind of our conversation around social media, one of the things that we brought everybody here together to do is to identify what we should be doing next. So the next question I'm going to have for each of you, as you kind of think through those themes and think through, you named a lot of different important things, it is really, what did the group think were the next steps for the health department? What is it that we collectively in New York City should be doing next? And just gonna stay with you, I'll ask you that question first.
Sure. As you see, I have a whole bunch of papers from all the notes that I took. A few things that were mentioned were parent toolkits, right? So packets or informational or ways to disperse the information, how schools have kind of like robocalls or things that are mailed out. So parents have information on how to have these conversations. They have strategies and techniques in order to enable them to communicate with their young people. We also spoke about parent-led and youth-led forums. As I mentioned, youth training the youth and coming together, so peer leadership. Community engagement, so utilizing community stakeholders and having these conversations, because sometimes, and maybe most of the time, people will connect with those who are from their community, right? They know them, they trust them. And so really lifting that voice of community stakeholders and being in space in conversation. And also education on, like I mentioned, building the conversation between parents and their young people. Maybe they don't know how to communicate. Maybe the same questions of, how was your day? That's not enough, right? So what are some more in-depth conversations that can be around the topic of social media that can help with engagement, setting some parameters, setting some times aside, and teaching parents how to do that effectively and feeling good about it, and not necessarily being scared to go there or have that interaction with their young people.
Great, so being very intentional about the conversations we're having with our kids and having
intentional and mindful.
Okay, great. Those are some really concrete, very solid tips. Thank you very much for that. Kiana, can I ask you the same question?
Yes, so similar to Jessica, we talked about from the beginning, from the ground up in research, we should bring in the community members. We talked about incentives, right? When working with youth and families, sponsoring research and providing incentives, particularly within the diverse, underserved community members. And we also spoke about leading the way in intervention and research, finding more funding for convenings such as this, involving mental health leaders, policy leaders, and community leaders.
Great, thank you very much. How about Marnie?
I think some resonant themes, actually. So there was a lot of support for working with community members to come together, for the city to engage community members, inclusive of youth, of course, to come together around a common sort of policy agenda and to work like in a sort of a coalition type fashion to advocate for the policy changes that we believe are needed. So that was, a lot of it was really around community engagement on that and advocacy. And then also to look across to see how New York City could partner with other localities that have common interests and have a common policy agenda as well.
Okay, great. So we're hearing a repeated theme of community, which is very interesting because it is a community issue, right? And I think we talked about earlier is a lot of people look to social media to find community, which is fine, but we also have to rely on community to help deal with some of the potential harms. And I think that's what we're hearing in all of these groups. I think, Marnie, your point about looking at how other jurisdictions have done this, obviously New York City is not alone in this effort. So we can be leaning on partners, and that's what we have many partners today here that are not from New York City. So I'm glad to hear that that also came up in the group. And I know you mentioned, Tim, some action steps already around litigation. Do you have any more to add on that?
Yeah, I think the most important thing to understand is that there's already momentum around these types of litigation, and as soon as this summer. And so a lot of the conversations really revolved around, well, how can we get the states and cities to file these amicus briefs? And then the second part, the second kind of action step was really around building the data story around these. And it kind of harkens back to all of the ideas around community. How do we engage parents and students in these litigations, which may often feel very far from their own experiences? And then how do we really think about, potentially creating focus groups around those types of voices in litigation?
Great, thank you all very much. So again, I think we hear common themes throughout this. One of the things that we also want to do is we want to hear specifically from our youth who participated in these groups. I know there's a few members of our audience who are youth that volunteered. If you can come up, if you remember that you volunteered. If you don't, and if you didn't volunteer but want to say something, please come join us.
Harlan?
So the same question for you. Basically, what I'd like to hear directly from you is when you think about, you're talking to, this is a whole team of health officials here. What do you think we should be doing?
So my name is Arnold Ludd. I'm here with MBSK Youth Council, and I work with different nonprofits. I have my own program called Gigabyte Gloves Up Guns Down that works in DOE communities and schools. But I think it goes back to what everybody said about community, investing in the community. One thing that I see the nonprofit I work with do, invest into the youth, listen to the youth. Just don't take the data that the youth is given, but taking the data and investing it back into youth to have their own programs. Like we have a Green A&Me program, bridging the age gap between youth and elderly. We have a urban gardens program. We have my program, Gloves Up Guns Down, giving the kids a space to be. So giving kids opportunities and pushing the opportunities out there so they can know about it.
That's great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thank you. I think that's a consistent theme also with what we heard this morning is don't just take away the social media or say social media is bad, replace it with something, right? And so that's what you're warning us to do. Hi. What's the question? Sure. The question is, what are the action steps you think that we as the health department should be taking?
Well, what I believe is that a lot of parents don't understand social media and they don't really know how to use it. And a lot of times they go towards their kids to ask for help. But what we need to do, we need to teach the adults how to use social media so then they can be better at monitoring what their kids are doing and watching what they're doing. So I think that's the first step. And also, like they said, our program, Teens Against Guns and Teaching a Generation, we help students get out of the streets and have less free time, and they're doing things that they're interested in. So these types of programs are very important in monitoring and stopping kids from doing these horrible things online.
Hello, my name is Harlem, and I feel like a big part of, trying to make social media more positive for the youth is trying to teach kids how to love themselves so they can take this negative information that they're seeing and try to benefit from it. Like me personally, if I see something negative about me on social media, I use it as my motivation because I've learned how to do that. I've learned how to transfer that energy from something negative into something positive. So I feel like we need to teach more kids how to do that, and also how to pass that on to others so they can motivate their friends and family when going through something difficult to do.
Thank you so much for that, Harm. I think one of the things that just resonated with me is we're talking a lot about the harms of social media, but we really should also be talking about how resilient kids can be and how to protect against those harms. And I think that's a really critical point. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Fatu, and I'm a part of TAG, Teens Against Guns and Teaching a Generation. I want to add on to what Harlem said about loving yourself. I feel like most of the times the cyberbullying happens because us as youth and just like everybody else, when you don't understand yourself what people say gets to you. And I feel like I also want to piggyback on what they said about having opportunities like youth organizations like TAG, getting kids off the street, giving them a place to go after school and not just staying in their school environment, and just giving them a space to enjoy themselves and not just be bored and getting themselves in trouble. So I feel like also giving them opportunities like internships and just after school programs, more of those.
thank you so much for all of those very helpful, very practical tips. I think one of the things that we've seen here today, at least for me, I am extremely inspired by the youth that came to this meeting, by the thoughts that they're providing. I'll tell you, I told my little 10-year-old nephew who lives in Seattle that I was coming to this meeting, and he was like, "Oh, do the kids that come get to miss school?" I was like, "No, it's actually a day off from school." And he's like, "What? You're making them work on their day off?" So thank you for being more civically minded than my nephew. Thank you for your service to New York City. One of the things that I will say is, as we continue and wrap up this session, we are very committed to continue to have the youth voice really at the helm of what it is we're doing here. Because again, you're giving us feedback and thoughts, and you know, a bunch of us can sit in a room and try to do this. It's not going to work if we do that. So as we've heard from every panelist, we've heard about the importance of community, and youth are such a major part of that community. So thank you again for sharing your ideas and your thoughts. And again, what we're going to do here, because we have this, there's a reason we sort of designed it this way, to get some very concrete action steps. So we can go back, we can look at those steps, and then figure out how to implement them really across the city and engage as many people as we can in this. So thank you all to our moderators. I really appreciate your the moderation this afternoon, and also your sharing. And again, thank you to our youth panelists. I will turn it over to our commissioner to close us out.
Thanks, Deepa. Look, first, I just want to thank you all. With everything going on outside, the fact that you came all the way for this day-long meeting means a lot to us. And it means a lot that we had your attention. I was probably the person here on my phone the most, because I'm scrambling with multiple things, but I really saw that everyone was really present and locked in and connected. I was sitting next to the mayor earlier this morning, and he was locked in and really focused on what you were saying on the panel. And that's just a testament to what we all feel here, which is this is a crisis that we have to get our hands around. It isn't like other public health crises because it's here to stay. Social media is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. The question is, can we redirect it? Can we shape it? Can we regulate it? Can we educate? Can we harm reduce? And can we engage people in shaping this for the better? Parents, teachers, government, clinicians, and most importantly, our young people. So I want to end by thanking you for being here, our young people. This is all about you. You know, in many ways, our habits, our adult habits on these platforms that, as you rightly said, we don't fully understand as adults, those are shaped. There is going to be a little bit hard to change those habits, but we're so committed as an administration and as a city to making sure that it's not just normal that you develop those same habits, right? And that we are doing our job as adults in creating the conditions to protect you, because you got your whole futures ahead of you, and the future is bright for you. The fact that you're here today and engaged and pushing us and leading us says that the future is incredibly bright for you folks in the room. And we can't do it without you. This is just the beginning of a conversation. As Deepa mentioned earlier today, this, much as we did 20 years ago with tobacco, we laid out a 5-point action plan as a result of a convening just like this. We're doing the same based on those principles that we've outlined here in the panels and what will come out of the proceedings here. So I'm very excited to do this work together. This is a national effort. It's a global effort. We have to learn from everyone. We need better data, but it starts here with community. Just remember that feeling. Remember that icebreaker when we said, put down your phones and just connect with one another. That's at the core of this. So I couldn't be more grateful. Grateful again to the Rockefeller Foundation for hosting us. And please stay in touch with us. This is just the beginning. Thanks so much.